welcome everyone on behalf of all of my Stopping as Success colleagues and the panelists that have joined us today. We're really excited to host our very first learning event today. And thank you for taking the time to join this conversation on the concept of mutuality and capacity strengthening. We encourage you to mute your mics at the start just so we can engage and listen into our panelists. But yeah, before I pass it on to my colleague, Michael Robinson, who will be your host for today, I wanted to share a few housekeeping points. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, and we are fixing the issue in terms of the chat being disabled. Um, um, please share your name, organization, and where you're calling in from today. And do engage with us on our chat. Please use the Q&A function to share your questions with us. And we will be making space towards the very end of our session for you all to engage with the panelists. Our event today will have translators. So for those of you who wish to engage in either Spanish or French, there's a globe icon on your Zoom toolbar. So if you click on that, it will give you the language options. So please pick the language you would like to engage with us. To plug in, do make sure to sign up for the Stopping as Success newsletter, where we hope to share with you about more of these learning events we hope to host in the future. And lastly, we will share more information on how you all can access the recording, as well as the discussion space on the platform for dialogue post-event for continued engagement. So without further ado, I'll pass it on to Michael Robinson, my fellow SAS Plus colleague, who will be your host for this learning event.
Kumasi, and I'm so excited to be chatting with you all. Just a reminder, if you are joining in as a participant, please try to mute yourself. So we are very excited at the Stopping a Success project to, one, have a focus on this concept of mutual capacity strengthening or mutuality in capacity strengthening processes. And we have 5 great panelists to be chatting more about this. Before we jump to panelists, I'll quickly share my screen and give you a bit more of an idea of who we are to be hosting this event and why we chose this topic. So hopefully everyone can see my screen. So Stopping as Success, this event, it's a consortium of organizations, including Peace Direct, CDA Collaborative Learning Projects, and Search for Common Ground. We're a 4-year cooperative ending in 2025. We are generating learning on how to facilitate responsible transitions from international to local actors at various levels. We've defined responsible transitions as jointly led, planned, gradual processes of a transfer of ownership from an international to a local level, while oftentimes maintaining some form of relationship, whether that be formal or informal. I'll let you take a look at some of the hallmarks, but really we've looked at transitions that have ranged quite greatly and looked quite differently across areas, across organizations, across partnerships. Sometimes they happen at organizational level, sometimes they're at a programmatic or even at a very narrow activity level. So today we're bringing you here to chat through mutual capacity strengthening. So that is, and hopefully everyone can see, but a process of strengthening skills, knowledge, and networks and contexts in which all actors participate as equal partners. We have a resource dedicated to this that we'll be sharing in the chat with you all, and that's really focusing on this concept. We decided that mutual capacity strengthening, which was a resource that we'd had in place from the original Stopping a Success project that ended in 2020, we decided that we wanted to update this resource because we've learned so much around mutual capacity strengthening from piloting, from working with partners, And we've also learned that people often see mutual or capacity strengthening as the key component to a transition to local ownership. That's, maybe not always the case, but it is often an important component. And we've decided that we would prioritize this resource so that we would really dive into why and how you can engage in this in a mutual way. To get a little bit into the why, engaging in mutual capacity strengthening challenges existing power dynamics and assumptions that local partners are the only ones who need capacity strengthening. This is very much not the case, and we've seen this in countless partnerships that international partners really benefit from capacity strengthening that happens at a two-way level. It also allows for partners to really explore what capacities they have, what strengths they have, and what areas for growth they all have together, and how they can support each other in that process. Doing all of this creates a greater shared ownership of the process and is a way to build trust among partners. So we've seen it really benefit in a number of ways. Some key steps that we found, listening is one of those really key components, and it remains important throughout the transition, not just at the beginning or design stages of capacity strengthening processes. Doing so should also allow you to build inclusive and shared language so that this process is framed in a way that resonates with all partners. It's also important to clearly outline roles for mutual capacity strengthening. Capacity strengthening doesn't always look like a formal training, and we've seen that, and I'm sure our panelists will be able to give us some great examples from their work. Determining these priorities mutually and narrowing the focus to what transition stakeholders matters most. So capacity strengthening really can cover a huge range of things. Some of them are very relevant for an organizational or project level transition, and some of them can go beyond that. It's important to really understand what you're asking of partners and what your expectations are from capacity strengthening. And then also regularly reflecting on capacity strengthening processes so that you're progressing and you're able to adapt. We've learned in transitions that flexibility is a really important aspect of that. So I'm not going to bore you all with a long presentation. Hopefully that was informative so that you all have a bit of an idea of why we've brought this space together and why we've invited these panelists to come and speak on this issue. I will now turn it over to our panelists to both introduce themselves, their organization, but also to share a little bit about why this concept of mutuality and capacity strengthening resonates with them. Maya, why don't we start with you?
Thanks, Michael. Really happy to be here with you today. Thanks also to the entire Stopping a Success team for curating the space for this important conversation. So I'm Maya. I'm the founder of Fearless Project and the Shifting Power Accelerator, which is an 8-week online course for nonprofit and philanthropic professionals who are looking to learn the how of equitable partnerships, empowering local leadership, and shifting power. So first, I want to point out something that I feel might be an elephant in this virtual room when we're talking about this word, this term, mutuality. So is it just me or is it hard to say? Mutuality. So I'll say it again, mutuality, and then for the rest of this event, respectfully, I'm not going to say it. And I say it respectfully because I can acknowledge the value in the usage. There is an appeal in the idea of something being mutual. So in preparation for this panel, I took the time to reflect on this a little bit. Why is the concept of being mutual desirable? The idea that something that is good for me is also good for you, that we can experience something in a similar or equally fulfilling way. It's something that is reciprocal or cooperative, that we're on equal footing. And you must be thinking, okay, these are all great things. Why is Maya making such a fuss about the term? And it's because, unfortunately, in the sectors in which we work, aid, development, peace building, things aren't always as they seem. And we may use the language of cooperation or partnership, but power is always at play. And this is due in large part to a colonial past and the top-down professional systems and cultures that we have inherited from that colonial legacy. So in the context of these inherited systems, the reality of working in a way that is mutual or mutually beneficial is rare. And I'm not making this up off the top of my head. This has been documented, it's been observed. In the Ringo Project's flagship research report called Fostering Equitable North-South Partnerships, the research team asked more than 600 civil society leaders around the world if they felt their relationships with INGOs were, and I quote, mutually beneficial. 85% said no, they are not. When asked to unpack this further, the clarifications from CSO leaders boil down to a lack of strategic decision-making by these CSOs. Northern partners were setting the terms to start with, so Southern partners were effectively providing input, feedback, being consulted, and so on. And I've observed this firsthand as well. Before the Fearless Project, I worked for international NGOs supporting civil society in Afghanistan, Central African Republic, South Sudan, Bangladesh, Myanmar, and beyond. And across these capacity building programs that I was supporting, I kept encountering the same outdated hierarchical dynamics. One directional learning, where the Northern partner was effectively the teacher and the Southern partner the student. Top-down approaches in which the curriculum was pretty much set before getting input with the partner organizations and participants. A top-down preoccupation with developing skills related to administration and technical areas at the expense of ecosystem leadership and organizational innovation. So I know this doesn't sound great, but I also don't want to paint an entirely negative picture of what was happening. To be fair, these INGOs were doing important work in really challenging circumstances. And it was clear that the partners were learning a lot, and anyone could see that it was having some kind of impact. Still, I knew that these learning and training approaches were not co-created or led by the partners themselves. And it was clear that not only the INGOs had a lot of areas in which they could improve and learn and grow, they had a vested monetary interest in continuing the work that they were doing. So I had a lot of questions that lingered from these experiences, and I'll share a few of those questions with you. How could learning programs be co-created? Could accompaniment, and I know this is something popular with the Stopping for Success model as well, could accompaniment a principle of learning, reflecting, and improving among equals be a better way? And also, how can we incentivize INGO investments in developing local leadership and innovation capacities with the risk of becoming irrelevant? It's a big, big question. So these observations and questions led me to my own journey of discovery and applied learning as a consultant. I immersed myself in the shift of power and cross-movement spaces. I learned and started practicing participatory approaches, took as many courses as I could on diversity, equity, inclusion, change management, and so on. And I began to integrate this into my practice, and this is really important. So looking for those examples of an accompaniment, collaborative learning, innovative and participatory capacity strengthening approaches that I could find, such as the Nuru model, again, the SAS plus model, and so on. And that's when I developed and launched the Shifting Power Accelerator. So I tried to incorporate these learnings into the curriculum itself and offer these learnings to practitioners asking themselves the same questions and working towards a better sector. So in summary, I'm on this lifelong journey myself. I know that, many of you, that's why you're here today. And we've come full circle. So that's really what attracted me to this concept and why it's really a part and integral to the work that I do.
Yeah, thank you so much, Maya. It's really fascinating to hear about your work and also to bring that power element to this conversation very clearly. I'll pass it over to our folks at the Nuru Collective. Matt, would you want to start?
Yes, I'd be pleased to start. Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Lineal. I work at Niru. We're a collective of locally led organizations. I work for a U.S. registered organization of that collective, what we just referred to as NIRU. And I am joined today by Amy Gaman, Managing Director of NIRU Nigeria, and Pauline Wambeti, Managing Director of NIRU Kenya. NIRU believes in cultivating lasting, meaningful choices in the most vulnerable and marginalized communities in the world. And the way that we work and operate and have since our founding in 2008 is as a group, what we refer to as a collective of locally led organizations that are registered, run, and operated in their own countries. We initially started working in Kenya, then later in Ethiopia, Nigeria, and now in West Africa, in Burkina Faso, and expanding from there. And so my own journey, I'll share just briefly, and then invite Amy and Pauline to join in. I've been working with NIRU now for 13 years. I've had the pleasure of working with Pauline for a decade and working with Amy for 6 years. Um, the our work has really shifted over this time. And Maya, even as you were sharing in your story, that even when we started out on this journey, we were talking about capacity building, which even as a terminology, as a framework, had this invisible power dynamic of saying, we are building your capacity. And it also recognized, or failed to recognize, that there was a starting place, a whole foundation, and a whole framework that already existed there. So then we moved to capacity development. And that was better. That was an improvement. Okay, we're working together, progressing towards the same goal. But now I'm so pleased to be on this panel and in a discussion today to talk about this mutuality of capacity strengthening, recognizing that it's not about me shifting power to you, or it's not just an exchange or an interaction, but rather that working together in concert, you and me and all of us, actually, that only then can we achieve something much greater than all of our combined effort. That only then can we get to that next level. And that's really where this strengthening idea resonates most with me, is that it's not necessarily just about that first building block. It's not about developing to do better to some level. It's actually becoming strong and resolute in our collective will and effort. With that, I'll hand it over to Amy Gaman.
Hello, everyone. Really excited to be here. And I'm glad that we're talking about mutual capacity strengthening. My name is Amy Gaman. Matt has already said that, and I'm the managing director for NURU Nigeria. So NURU Nigeria is one of the local organizations that is very fortunate to be founded with the true concept of localization in mind. And when I say with the true concept of localization in mind, it is built on certain values and certain principles. And I like that we're talking about mutuality because it is built on those values and principles. The principle of openness, vulnerability, trust, respect, and authenticity, right? These are not values or principles that we usually will put on our website or anything. They are things that we really feel because the room is open for everyone to communicate. The room is open for everyone to learn. The room is open for everyone to share. NURU Nigeria as an organization work with local farmers in rural communities. And why I like to say that it is built on the true definition of localization, it's because before NURU Nigeria even started implementing its programs, we started with a program planning process for a period of 6 months. And this is a period whereby we are discussing with community people. Remember that I'm part of that community too. Funny enough, I go into these communities and the community I even come from, and every day I learn new things from the people from the community. Every day I recognize my privileges. Every day I recognize my opportunities. And this is even myself as someone who is coming from that community and has lived all her life within that community. Then think about someone who is coming from another country entirely, or someone who is coming from another region in the same country. Then think about someone who comes from the United States, coming down to Nigeria, not just to Nigeria, but also to Northeast Nigeria. Then apart from being in the northeastern part of Nigeria, also coming to communities that have one time been Boko Haram Caliphate. How does that person come in with a blueprint for implementation? So the concept of that local design process was very important for all of us, because that process helps you to drop your MBA, helps you to forget that you've been through school for several years. You are there to be reschooled. Like an African proverb says, you cannot shave a man's head in his absence. So designing program outside of the people is actually shaving their heads in their absence. And I think my journey in Nuru has transitioned from stage to stage, from a period where we talk about mentorship, when we talk about coaching, to a period where we are saying strengthening capacity, and to this time whereby we are saying knowledge sharing and capacity sharing. Just recognizing the expertise that even exists within the local entity, and that the international counterpart can also tap into that expertise. So I think for me, this is built in certain principles, and I like that we enjoy it in Nuru. Not just for a local organization like Nuru Nigeria, but also for the farmer organizations that we work with. So the key part of this is communication. And when I say communication, it's also built on that openness. When Nuru came, that's Matt and his team came to Nigeria, they started with saying, Amy, this is your organization. Even before anything, we are going to leave. So that is very important, because it created that high sense of ownership, high sense of commitment from the start. And when we were forming the farmer organization, we were also saying, this is your organization, because Nuru is going to scale to somewhere else, and we need to build it sustainably. And at the point when Nuru was exiting, the international team were exiting, they were able to also, that spirit of openness to say, we will not do this alone. We need another partner to help us exit responsibly. And that was where Stopping at Success comes from. So we started collaborating with Stopping at Success. And then for me, talking, brainstorming with someone outside of the Nuru collective was also a different experience, because all the blind spots that we might have had in our shared goals and our shared vision of how this will go on was really unfolding. I was talking to other people. I was talking to another organization that is speaking different language from the shared language we have, and I was learning also from that process. And the good thing I enjoyed with the SAS Plus journey was also the fact that when SAS Plus came in, they were also like, Amy, how do you want this to go? So it wasn't like I was like, okay, now Matt and his team have handed us over to this organization. That means they have figured it out. All the things I'm worried about legitimacy, worried about credibility, worried about funding, worried about, okay, now that I am handed over to this organization, they have it figured out. So let's talk now. Tell me all the solutions. But they came and were like, how do you want this to go? I'm like, okay, what are the areas that you think? And then how do you want us to approach this? What are the things that already exist? And what are the things that you will be needing at this point and going forward? So I think that is really important, that you have, that all of us have a sense that, okay, there is a capacity that exists, and the fact that we recognize that that capacity exists, we recognize the competence that exists there, and we are willing to share with each other. And we recognize that we are not just strengthening the organization in the global north, in the global south. We are also, there is a knowledge that we can gain from that local organization that will strengthen our own system and strengthen our own efficiencies. So I think that was a very important one. So I think starting with that, that's my journey in Nuru, and I'm really excited about it. And I'm also happy that I'm sharing this journey with farmers at community level. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Amy. And I'll hand it over to Pauline from Nuru, Kenya.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Apologies for not being on video because of our weather conditions, but I really sincerely hope you can hear me clearly. So I'm Pauline Wambeti, the Managing Director for Nuru Kenya. I have been with Nuru for 11 years now, and I'm excited about this topic, and especially because working for Nuru has really been an enlightening experience. I am part of a collective that is continually challenging themselves to bring about change and challenge the status quo in the various environments we work. I am also a SAS Plus advisory team member, and Nuru Kenya was a case study, and I feel that it really propelled us in the right direction. And that's why this topic for me is very exciting. In order to catalyze development in our communities, we just have to appreciate the value of mutual capacity strengthening and having those shared goals in development, and being able to challenge the prevailing situations that are holding us back and break those barriers. We now are seeing the fruits of the efforts we've put in to ensure our voices as a local team are being heard. We are, as Nuru Kenya, transitioned from an expatriate-led intervention, and we are happy that our international development facilitators were very accommodating. But we know there are others who do not experience the same. We are happy that through championing and sharing our experiences, we get to advocate for the local communities to not only be seen and listened to, but to also provide learning to those who are facilitating development. They have started to understand why we want to be the ones who are determining the outcomes, why we want to be the ones defining our success. We know the solutions we want to see because we have experienced these challenges year in, year out. Every generation we keep recycling the same things, and we want that to stop. So when we say that we want to be given the space to define success, to define the outcomes, and to have our partners in development learning from us why we are defining things this way, then they can now start investing in our ideas, not their ideas. Then they can start seeing the value of the investment because the solutions will come in faster, the solutions will be more sustainable. I say this is a learning journey. Development is a journey of learning where for us, we want to carry along our stakeholders. We want to ensure not only are we transitioning, is the transitioning of power and resources taking place, but we are also being adaptive when the results of the transitions lead to new challenges. So we need to be able to address those emerging issues. Community problems are very dynamic, and we have to make sure that we are able to address those new or emerging challenges that we continue to encounter. So we have to be highly adaptive. I am now experiencing new things in the governance space. It's not just ending extreme poverty, which is our goal, to ensure that we empower the communities we are working in the country, in Kenya, to lift themselves out of generational poverty, to be able to address these solutions more sustainably and introduce market-based approaches so that they set up thriving ecosystems that can support them. But we also want, in the governance space that we are now in, we want to look at promoting dialogue to ensure that those shifts that are happening in resource and power transitions are bearing fruits. We are introspecting. We are looking at how do we hold ourselves accountable, how do we hold each other accountable in that mutual space. We want to have the humility to ensure we call out things when they're not working well, and we are able also to mobilize ourselves to collectively address some of the gaps we are seeing. So it's a development where we are not stripping each other of dignity, but we are learning from each other so that we understand better how to pull those resources that are necessary and ensure that we have the solutions and the outcomes we have invested our time, our money, our learning, our shared lessons to ensure that this is a success. So I really appreciate SAS for this forum, and I'm excited to continue sharing our experiences and also to learn from others. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pauline. And I know that Amy and Pauline have talked about the journey of working with staffing as success. And so you'll see Nuru mentioned in various places throughout our resources. We've been in partnership since 2017. And Matt, what you were talking about with the language shifting and how we talk about capacity strengthening, how we have talked about it. That's very much a process that Staffing as Success has been involved in as well. So we've been seeing that quite present in our work. And now I'm going to pass it to Arjun, our panelist from USAID's New Partnerships Initiative.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you, everyone. It's wonderful to be here and be on this amazing panel with fabulous colleagues. What drew me to this concept is a tricky one, but it's been something I've been thinking about for a very long time. And so I'll just basically, to introduce myself, give you a little bit of that journey, and I'll try to be brief because I know that we have a lot of questions to get to. I started at USAID in 2014 to help launch the Local Works program, which funded the first Staffing as Success effort. And that program had as part of its mandate to help the agency do more locally led development. A huge challenge for an enormous bilateral donor that has a lot of different constraints upon it, whether those are legal and regulatory or congressional or any number of challenges to doing that effectively. And we looked at a number of different things, but we were also able to build on amazing work coming out of ODI, out of doing development differently, out of the work on thinking and working politically, from even looking back at some of the amazing work in the 90s on asset-based community development. And 5 years later, I had the opportunity to lead the drafting of USAID's local capacity strengthening policy. And in between those periods, the launch of the program, we learned a lot through the Local Works program, but USAID also learned a lot from our efforts under USAID Forward and Local Solutions to drive more money directly to local organizations. And in doing so, what we did a lot of, as we called it, capacity building, right? What we did a lot of was exactly the work that Maya was pointing out, and very much in the nature of, we as donors tell a smaller, local, or new organization all the things they're doing wrong or the gaps they have in their systems and need to be addressed and how they should do those things, and follow this advice, say thank you, here's some money, hope your work is good. And that is the opposite of anything approaching mutuality, mutual objectives, mutual accountability. And I think, part of what we tried to do as we crafted the local capacity strengthening policy is set an enabling environment to allow for a mindset shift, to allow for USAID to sort of make a distinction between compliance and capacity, and to think in an asset-based way, and to think in a form that shifted as much power as was feasible within our constraints to local actors, in particular to point out where they want to go, what capacities they were seeking. I do think, mutuality is a mindset shift, not only for donors and international organizations, but also for organizations who've been on the receiving end, in particular of that sort of less than equitable relationship, to articulate and advocate for what they want, what they can offer, play a more active role in the partnership, and seeking and giving feedback to us along the way. But I think that is incredibly difficult and requires trust. I think that has been my observation over the past decade, is when you're thinking about sustainability and you're thinking about effective relationships and strong networks, and you're thinking about capacity strengthening, you must consider sort of trust in order to sort of go in that mutual, to build a relationship that's characterized by mutuality requires that trust. And it's, as Maya points out, with the sort of inherent power dynamics, that can be difficult and requires sort of intentional changes to behavior on USAID and donor and international actors' parts, but also intentional effort on the part of individuals trying to build a relationship that allows for capacity sharing or shared learning over time. I'll stop there and turn it back to you, Michael.
Thank you, Arjun. Yeah, I really appreciate those comments and that ability to build relationship, not just together, but also through this process of mutuality, of capacity strengthening. That in and of itself can be a platform to really strengthen a relationship as well. So I am also going to invite all of our audience to participate in a one-question poll that we have. That'll go out. Hopefully now you can see it. Just to get a sense of how people are understanding this concept in the room and in the fields that we work in. And I'll also open the question to our panelists around, thinking about actually carrying out capacity strengthening in a way that is mutual, in a way that embodies shared ownership. What has that, looked like? Have you noticed challenges in particular in carrying out these processes? I know that we've talked about kind of the challenges of shifting mindsets. I welcome you all to expand on that a little bit. And, if there's anything you'd like to say about how this relates to sustainability, I'd welcome that as well. And I'll pass it to anyone of our panelists who would like to jump in.
Sure. I'll take a crack at it, and I think maybe my colleagues here on this panel can take a sort of different or contrasting response, mostly because as a donor, then I tend to get like right in the weeds, because that's part of how we interact. We interact with other actors through grants, cooperative agreements, contracts, awards, right? And I think part of what if we're going to do mutual capacity strengthening is that it needs to be built into activity designs, into contracts, the flexibility and time and resources behind mutual capacity strengthening, behind building those relationships I was talking about and generating trust. It just takes more time. And when it's done well, the results are exponential. And not just in terms of the capacity of the participants and of partners, but on outcomes. But building that time in for sort of mutual learning and as opposed to sort of one directional capacity work is more resource and time intensive. It's not typical of USAID solicitations. And so when I have seen it done well, it's because it's built in from the start of USAID's thinking and the start of, when you see a solicitation that doesn't already say exactly what's going to be done and what we're going to fund, that's a good sign that there's someone on the other side thinking about this more broadly and hoping that the design is going to come from the actors participating in that effort. And in terms of sustainability, I guess I'll make a second point. It's certainly the basis for the local capacity strengthening policy that we crafted, and one of the primary reasons and part of the premise is capacity for what, right? And in the policy, we're saying that capacity strengthening, is in itself a strategic priority, so that local systems can produce and sustain locally valued development and humanitarian outcomes via collaboration across local actors, right? So that capacity strengthening work isn't supposed to be for USAID's sake, right? So that organizations can better comply with our rules or do exactly what we told them, and certainly not capacity just for capacity's sake. I think, part of the way we think about capacity and mutual capacity strengthening is about performance, achieving real goals and change, and not making it a check the box activity for sort of a funding process. And I think that's sort of essential if you're going to think about sustainability at all, is to have that intentionality on the sustainability of partnerships and on building those relationships so that capacity is, for the locally generated objectives that are hopefully locally sustained. And I'll turn it back to you, Michael, or to my colleagues.
Yeah, thank you, Arjun. And I see Amy, if you want to join, and then Pauline.
Yes. So I see some of the challenges that is being experienced when it comes to mutuality or capacity strengthening or even localization and shifting the power. I think like Arjun started, I will just start from building trust. So building trust requires a lot of commitment and it requires a lot of humility, because first is somebody needs to acknowledge that as I'm coming into this new terrain, I would need to recognize the cultural competence that exists there. I will need to recognize the level of knowledge and everything that exists in that ecosystem. So I need to shift from whatever I had learned and I'm very sure of, to be humble enough to say, I don't know. I need help and I need probably I need to change my approach. The other part is expectation biases. Also, just like I stated when I was starting, I said, okay, we have like in terms of Nuru, we are sure of shared ownership, we are sure of commitment, we are sure of openness and all of this in our journey. But at this point, Nuru is exiting. That means the international team are leaving and SAS Plus is coming. Personally, as the leader of Nuru Nigeria, I had my own expectations. I was like, okay, SAS Plus is coming with that solution, but also SAS Plus are also expecting that I should be coming in with something that will help us navigate this conversation. And it's the same thing. It continues on and on. It just leaves also me, myself as a local partner, to also the government of the country where I work in, the stakeholders I engage with, the farmers I engage with. There is always that expectation bias. So, and because there are those expectation bias, we need to form like a risk aversion process, but you cannot even form that risk aversion because you don't even know what risks exist and you don't know what questions will be coming in. So there is always that point where I don't know happen. Then flexibility in terms of resources. To build a self-sustaining organization like Nuru requires a lot of resources to invest, a lot of resources to be invested in. Like I talked about the program planning process. How many donors will be patient enough to say, oh, they need 6 months to have this true system of localization, to have conversations beyond need assessment, beyond participatory appraisal, beyond all of those concepts that we've already designed, to have true discussions, true co-creation with the community where they are going to work in. So there is always that issue of immediate results as at today, and side by side the indicators that determine that immediate result and immediate impact, then building a self-sustaining local enterprise, and also building a system of development that will be led by the people who need the development themselves. So I think those are issues that there are challenges that exist whenever we are building this system. And when you talk about mutuality and sustainability, I think it's difficult to sustain an organization that the people whom it's difficult to sustain a development that the people whose issues are being discussed are absent in that development process. So building that true ownership and also saying this needs to be driven by you, it's very, very important in ensuring sustainability. Because if it is driven by you, then it is self-sustained. I would always sit and think, whenever I'm reflecting, I don't think if Matt comes to Nigeria, he will love Nigeria more than Amy will love Nigeria. So when you look at it in that direction, that means if it's going to be very sustainable, it means people who are involved in it, the concept of true nationalism and all of those things needs to come in, recognizing their cultural competence. And all of those is very, very important whenever we are doing it. And that way, if we recognize all of this and put an effort into it, and also joint resources, solidarity, and all of those principles that allow the local people to be very authentic, to be able to provide solution, to be able to be open to their own processes, I think sustainability will be achieved.
Thank you so much, Amy. And yeah, Pauline, please.
Thank you. I will echo what my colleague panelists have said, and I will indicate that mutual capacity strengthening is bringing us to dialogue on pertinent issues in development and helping us to understand how to change our mindsets so that we are open to new concepts, new ideas, and not just looking at what are we bringing to the table, but what are we also receiving? What new information or new concepts are we learning? Then we appreciate the strengths we all bring, and we also have ownership that we have a role to play to address the gaps that we find are existing in our partnerships. We at Nuru Collective, and even in our respective countries, have realized that we need to do this at all levels of our networking, even as we interact with the communities. Nuru Kenya has continued to evolve, and the collective has continued to evolve based on these dialogues. There is a change in the power dynamics. It's not just the mindset, it's also the dynamics that are changing, especially the power dynamics, because they tend to leave you feeling like you're losing control. Then we have to ask ourselves, is this really losing control, or are we actually being successful in our empowering others? So losing your power does not necessarily mean that you become powerless. It could be defined as you have shifted the power, you've empowered those who are not having a voice in the development journey, those who are not having a voice. to table their ideas that are pertinent to success, and being able to do that without feeling like you're losing control, like you're no longer really integral in that process. It's about ownership. Like I said, we need to own the solutions. We need to own the challenge of coming up to address the gaps. We need to evolve. We also need to drive ourselves to evolve, because in development, you will not be left unchanged. You will have acquired lessons. You'll have done things differently. You'll be having a story to tell. And so you're evolving even in your perspective on things. So are you driving yourself to evolve to the level where the next partnership that you're engaging in will even have more impact for you? We are looking at inculcating practices that will regenerate themselves, that will continue to address those issues even in a better way, that will continue to challenge people to improve themselves. And that is why it is important for us to delve into this, because we each have a role to play, no matter what resources we are bringing, the percentage of resources we are bringing to the table. We are all important in the development journey, either as partners who are experiencing the problem, or some of the partners who have part of the solution. We are all very important in this process. So having that mutuality in addressing the issues and respecting each other and supporting each other without feeling like we're fighting in that space to wield power is very important. So that is what I would say is contributing to us being able to address challenges across the spectrum, and also to inculcate those sustainability practices. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pauline. Maya or Matt, do you want to jump in on this question?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in. So I really appreciate the comments, especially from Amy and Pauline, about their personal experiences working in the local context. And I think I just want to reiterate those challenges that both of them mentioned. Just to make sure that it is really clear that the trust aspect of it cannot be overstated. And I see that there's been a lot of trust that's been built through the SAS Plus program, through the Neuro Collective, and your ways of working. But a lot of that is based on relationships, right? And at the individual level, at the interpersonal level, it's about emotional intelligence and skills. It's about cross-cultural competency and skills, and an interest in engaging in that. And so I think that really needs to be stated. If that's not done in a systematic way at an organizational level or at a sector level in which that's emphasized, that is really important and that is a prerequisite to the path forward, then I think we're losing something, and it's really hard to move forward. But building trust also takes a lot of time. So, and especially when it's about repairing trust that's been broken in the past. And when everyone's coming to the table as equal partners, I'm again going to reiterate the power dynamics that are just embedded there. Again, because the status quo, the starting point is which there's really clear delineations in terms of hierarchies. How can you really overcome that? And I think one of the things as well that's really important to notice, I think Amy mentioned like a familiarity bias or confirmation bias, those sorts of things. I'm a big fan of using these cognitive biases as a way to really understand the way that we work as well. So I'd like to share another one that I learned about recently. It's called the Einstellung effect. It's German, Einstellung, which means attitude or setting. So it's really the idea that when we approach a problem, we tend to approach problems with a mindset that worked for us in the past, even if a more efficient solution exists. So that's always going to be the bias that we return to. Oh, and sometimes without even realizing, without recognizing it, as we fall into those old patterns. And so it's really important to be very clear. And I know that the SAS Plus guidance shares this. And so that's really great. It can't be, I think, overstated. And I would say, in addition to this, really important co-creation, Amy mentioned this, Pauline mentioned this as well, the co-creation aspect of it. Again, if you're approaching something as equals, the status quo is going to be, you're going to fall back into those old patterns in which perhaps the international NGO is going to be leading or the global partner is going to be leading. And so it's really important to be actively thinking about this in terms of being local partner led. So I think even though you may be approaching things from a co-design perspective, a co-creation perspective, if we keep in mind that the partner ultimately should be leading, that's the goal at the end of the day, I think there is a way. So all of that really important. Another thing that I want to mention is about coming back to incentive structures. So again, the way that the sector is designed and the systems in which we operate and work, the incentive structures of INGOs, if learning is truly mutual, right, it needs to go both ways. So what are you learning as the INGO? It needs to be made explicit. We can't just say, oh, yes, we're going to go in and we're going to learn about the local culture and the context, but make it very clear, outline those roles. What are the learning outcomes on both sides? Question, is there a conflict of interest in your partner being completely self-reliant? And when I say, completely self-reliant, that means even the possibility of going completely independent, no affiliations, no sort of membership, no sponsorship, and so on. Are we doing as much as we can to really open up that space? And it may be awkward, but I'd say the leadership buy-in is really critical because there may be these conversations happening at the team level, at the individual level who are doing the capacity strengthening programs. But in order for a successful change initiative to move forward, it's important that everyone is bought in. And I would say this is really timely. It's 2024, right? A lot of organizations are currently reviewing their strategic plans, their 5-year plans. And so I'd encourage, many of you listening in, if you're part of these organizations that are going through this process, say your 5-year plan, 2025 to 2030, make this a priority, make it explicit. How are you going to be doing mutually capacity strengthening? How are you going to be approaching equitable partnerships? So I think a lot of that is important for sustainability. I have some more thoughts about sustainability, but I don't want to take up too much space. So Matt, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Maya. Picking up on where you started, the people-to-people interactions, often that's seen as a limiting factor or variable in capacity strengthening, that it won't scale because it relies on people interacting with one another. It relies on building trust. And how are we going to do that to make really a global solution that works for everyone? And my approach to that, and my challenge personally, has been to really adopt a values-led approach. And when we act on values, that can be a framework that endures. That can be a framework that scales globally. And so where I've landed is holding simultaneously two values that are at odds with each other. On the one hand, really feeling called to act. We must act. The world in so many places are not stable, resilient, or prosperous. And personally, but also at our organizations, we feel compelled, and I don't know a stronger version of the word compelled, called, it out of necessity, we must act. But then at the same time, humility, because it's about local action. It's about action of people who are closest to their own strengths and capacities are those best postured to act upon them. And so in the conduct of local and mutual capacity strengthening, holding at odds, again, a need to act. We should intervene. It shouldn't hold us back. We shouldn't be afraid to act for fear of doing something wrong or off track. We need to have the courage to innovate and intervene and be involved. It's critically important to our future. But then at the same time, that all that needs to be predicated on humility and a trust that's not just established because I've worked with Pauline for 10 years or we've collaborated with Stopping a Success for 7 years. You never take for granted that track record is some sort of in the bank. That trust has to be re-earned in every interaction, in every day, in every week, and constantly re-earned with those people that you work with most closely, or with people you do not know yet. And that must be a precept before I even think to do anything and have any sort of interaction with you, that I'm thinking through how any sort of proposed capacity strengthening would or could be even mutual. And whether that's Pauline and I are coming to go meet with some intended supporters or donors here in a meeting in Washington, D.C., or perhaps Amy. I'm visiting Nigeria, and Amy invited me to go visit a group of farmers, and I have great ideas about a new nitrogen fixing type of seed, and I'd love to impart that knowledge to farmers. Well, in either of those scenarios I described of where you could talk about doing capacity strengthening, where Pauline is going to come to that donor meeting and do a certain thing, or I'm going to do something interacting with farmers in that engagement, really holding a check. Okay, how do I act with humility in this situation, but also not having that hold you back from taking action, from contributing the knowledge and skills you do have to contribute. And so that's that's the hard part of doing the capacity strengthening for me, is acting on that need to be involved and intervening, but doing that in a way that's appropriate, responsible, and reinforces that mutuality without, to use your words, Pauline, without breaking down the dignity of any one party.
Thank you, Matt. And thank you to all 5 of you. I feel like there's so many questions and follow-up questions I have just from your answers to that one. But I think what I'm hearing is a real through line in this concept, applying this concept to capacity strengthening, not being the norm, being something that we are shifting mindsets on, being something that we are seeking to shift power and seeking to change and challenge the status quo. With that in mind, I know we asked our audience to participate in a poll. I'd love to see the results of that, just on how people in this space are seeing capacity strengthening. Seems like a lot of people are seeing that this is a possibility and a means to shift power, which is really great. And also, hopefully, we can all kind of grow and learn through this conversation. I know I already have so far, but just in how we're thinking about that. I think that, for this next question, I think we've all talked about, different ways that we've advocated for these changes, given advice on how others can embody this. Be really interested to hear if in these conversations, either with colleagues, counterparts at other organizations, donors that you're working with, or colleagues within USAID and other donor spaces that you're collaborating with. Have you had any aha moments? Have you had any words that you've shared or advice that you've given that you felt like really created some kind of momentum behind this idea. And I'll open the space again. So if anyone wants to jump in, please feel free. Maybe I'll get the ball rolling and I'll say, Matt, do you wanna jump in on this?
Be happy to. The a key insight that we gleaned recently on how working with mutual capacity strengthening can actually support partnerships. We were working on some research and a publication actually with Stopping a Success Plus. And there came a point of a question of, okay, well, when NURU, the US side works with NURU Nigeria, um, how does it not that one organization finds itself competing with the other um, over funding, over opportunities or prospects? Is there any point where you actually find yourself coming into competition? And the interesting part of that exchange, and Amy was on that same interaction as well, was that it was actually the opposite issue we experienced is that we had found a way that by working together, that we had that shared strength in the common identity. And so having that common identity, that brand of Nuru and sharing in that, having those that vision that we share is one of the hows of of making this work. That you have that vision, that you have that value that you can share. But then the other part of that really makes it work in the partnership is having the things that differentiate you as well. And so, for instance, Amy and Nuru Nigeria have their own mission. They have their own objectives. They have their own priorities and work goals and ways of working. And so, there are often very different priorities between different organizations, even though we share a same or similar overarching core identity. So that just to share an anecdote of a way that you can be together, but also separate and kind of always finding that way to work together, but taking advantage of the comparative strengths and advantages that the different partners have. And I think even all of us today, by the mere fact that we're here, have areas of, I would say, would be my assumption, we have areas of common alignment and we also have areas of comparative strength. And again, those are things that can actually, if we coordinate in the right ways, those are things that can work together. They don't have to result in just competition that cuts one another down. It can be a mutually reinforcing advantage and way of working together.
I can jump in as well, just briefly. You know, in terms of aha moments and advice, I do a lot of work with USAID missions on any number of things and I get lots of questions. And in one post where the colleagues in the mission really already, you know, believe in, buy into, want to support and work in this way, right? And they said, why is our INGO partner not doing this? they're doing the opposite of, you know, what's in the policy and what they ask them to do. And so the clarifying question is, well, but what's in their award? What did you ask them to do? If you designed this and it wasn't in the solicitation, it wasn't in the award, how can you hold a partner accountable to, you know, sort of the new thinking that you have because you basically just designed a USAID project and gave someone money to implement it and told them everything what to do. So if you built no space there, you know, you see similar challenges. Usually I'm asking a question, and in one instance, you know, some colleagues, they really wanted to work on local priorities. They're trying to talk to local actors who are telling them, these are the priorities, you know, are you guys going to fund something in this space? And the answer was no, but it came with no communication. And the reason the answer was no was very straightforward. Congress only gave that mission water money. They could only fund things that would achieve a water objective of some type. The thing is, if you say that out loud and make that real, everyone can understand that. It's not like governments in any country in the world don't impose restrictions of various types on all kinds of actors. But USAID has, as a sort of default, this lack of transparency and this idea that we need to sort of keep stuff behind a black box. And I think the biggest aha moments have been when I encourage transparency. You find a colleague being more transparent with a partner, with local actors, and it is always positive. It is always a positive interaction for those colleagues, and that sort of leads down a pathway. I think the last thing I'll say is that, you know, every individual and organization can continue to learn and grow, right? No person or group does anything right 100% of the time. And investing in our own capacity while also sharing our capacity to the benefit of others is a gift. It is a privilege. I think international organizations and donors and international institutions don't often get the opportunity to sort of invest in ourselves in this particular like meaningful way. And so it's important to approach any capacity strengthening work and learning work in a way that's not extractive and tries to like build that mutual benefit. And I think, you know, part of that is emphasizing that transparent feedback loops that sort of build trust and safety, setting clear expectations. It's all the sort of basic advice. But I think when you can have someone get that realization that they too will learn and grow if you operate in this fashion, there's like something powerful there for individuals. Over.
Thank you, Arjun. Yeah, Maya, Amy, or Pauline, do you want to jump in on this question, or I can also open it up to some of the audience questions that we've received?
I'll jump in on the question, but I will just keep it short. One of the aha moment that I have had is with a donor, just like you said, Michael. We co-created what we want to work with the donor, and then the target for the donor was 65% women inclusion, so in the activity. And at this point, you know, I know that it's no longer news that probably everyone knows that in Africa, women have limited access to land. And in some places in Africa too, women do not even inherit lands, ancestral lands, or they cannot even own lands. So for this donor, usually when they work with other organizations, they will ask that organization that for like the demonstration plots and all of those, it's expected to be donated by the community as part of their contributions. But I am working in northeastern Nigeria, and this is a place whereby the lands are limited because of conflicts. Access to land is already limited by conflict, and also women do not also own lands in these communities. So we are establishing demonstration plots, and our donor is saying, you need the community to donate lands to you. How will they donate lands to us when they don't even have enough lands themselves? So we have to say, okay, why don't we pay a fee and then work together, and then we cultivate on a farmer's land, and the farmer takes the harvest and all of those things. We do that demo plot there. And when we came back and say, oh, there is limited access to land, and we think that in your other projects, the way this is approached is that the community gives you the land because they don't have any other options, really. They want the development to come to them, but they don't have any other option if the project insists that they must donate a land before it happens. So when I said that, the donor in the room was like, we thought it was just natural that they have community-owned lands that they could just give out and everything. So we're like, no, this doesn't exist this way. And yes, you said we should target 65% women. Majority of our farmers are women, so they don't own land. So who does the donation to you? You know, because if they are the ones in the leadership position and all of those, who does the donation, you know? So at that point, the donor was like, oh, we didn't see it in that direction. But I was also excited that the donor was flexible enough to acknowledge that that was a gap, because I didn't expect with another donor, they didn't acknowledge that. I was excited that this time this donor was also able to acknowledge that, oh, I didn't realize, you know, that this is a problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Yeah, and if there's nothing burning from, oh, Pauline, yes, I'll have you jump in, and then I'll jump to some of the audience questions.
Okay, thank you so much. I just want to share that, and I'm sorry I lost some connectivity, but I hope I'm audible. I just want to share that with our experience having been supported to set up by Nuru stateside, the stateside team, we've had to go through a lot of transitions, and we've also have had the opportunity to evolve amongst ourselves. And I like saying that we have been able to have very good experiences, and we like sharing them because we expect other INGOs will also share the opportunities that we experienced with others. That patience, that level of trust, that capacity to accept that you at first thought things would be smooth when there was that transition, only for us as local implementing partners to realize that these are not working the way the international partner expected, and let us do away with some of the things that were left behind and work with what we know best. We were allowed to do that. We even had very elaborate and expensive softwares that were left behind, but we just were not able to work with them. These are investments that other partners possibly could have said they've gone to waste, but they were working, they were functional at that time. But as we continued with our interventions, they became redundant. So when you don't force things on partners, then it becomes easy for them to also develop and co-create solutions for themselves that are more functional, that are more meaningful, that are more sustainable. Then the fact that I keep challenging us to evolve. Our relationships change. The more when we get into partnerships, the more we learn from each other, the more other vulnerabilities come to light. Do we take advantage of those vulnerabilities, or do we use that opportunity to build each other so that we continue to grow in that space? And that way we are able to even scale our best practices. So it's about us being accommodative so that even when those strengths that brought us together, when they evolve into some vulnerabilities along the way, what do we do with that situation? And we've seen ourselves now being even seen as a donor, yet we are in that local space. We come from the communities, we are working, and now they stopped seeing Nuru International or Nuru Stateside as the donor. Now they are looking at us as the donor, yet we are a development facilitator that is coming from the community. And that's how Amy is able to say, even when we come from the community and think we know everything, we still learn. We still find ourselves changing our mindset. We start wearing new hats, and we are seen in new light. So how do we adapt to that? How do we address those issues that are now being channeled to us when we are facilitators and we come from the local community, but the perceptions have changed? Then how do we also relinquish that control to ensure that even the control we are fighting for from our international partners, we ourselves as local partners are also able to relinquish the same without feeling powerless? Then how do we address the issues of working ourselves out of a job? Are we able even to do that and say, now this is a success? They are actually doing it and we are no longer needed here. So there's a lot that mutual capacity strengthening is bringing to the table for discussion. And I appreciate that these conversations are getting to the level where we just have to speak about the elephant in the room. We have to ensure that we hold ourselves accountable and responsible, and we must be humble enough to understand each of the roles that we are required to play and how to bring about that change.
Yeah, thank you, Pauline. And I'll just shout out to all of our audience. We've had a really active Q&A. We've had a really active chat. It's so fascinating to see how others are engaging with these concepts in their work, but also in this conversation with each other. We had a few questions that have been focused around the evidence that we're seeing to support this process, to support this model, and also how we're understanding a long-term impact. We'll have a space on Platform for Dialogue where we'll be adding all of the audience Q&A questions too. And so we'll send that in follow-up of this call and invite you all to join there. But maybe I can pass to Maya to speak to this question.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. So I think a lot about data and evidence in everything that I do. I think it's really important not only to approach mutually capacity strengthening from an ethical and inclusion standpoint, but also from an effectiveness standpoint at the end of the day, right? We want to make sure that what we're doing has an impact, that it's sustainable, and so on. And so just a couple thoughts on sustainability, and then we'll share a reference for you about data and evidence. So first, I think the type of sustainability that we as a sector should be focused on is not necessarily the sustainability of the INGO local NGO partnership. Rather, in carrying through on our larger commitments to shifting power, localization, decolonizing aid, and so on, the type of liberatory futures, right, that we're all hoping for, is one in which there is a significantly reduced need for INGOs, right? It's not to say that INGOs should not exist or that local NGOs should not have the choice and opportunity to seek and gain affiliation, membership, sponsorship, or, as many INGOs and counterparts have done, chosen to do. What I mean to say is that we should be aiming for a sector and as a growing movement in that it remains a choice. So the choice shouldn't be made out of a feeling of not having another competitive alternative, right? So in other words, the system as it's currently set up is so that there's many more benefits to being affiliated with an international NGO than there are to being independent, especially in terms of capacity development, accessing funds, and being seen as more credible by donors. So there are now, of course, many and large efforts underway to correct this asymmetry. And hat tip to Arjun, USAID's new partnerships initiatives. But there's still a long way to go. And one way to really invest in supporting the development of strong, independent local NGOs and CSOs and grassroots groups that don't need to rely on INGOs and intermediaries is through investments in local leadership development and innovation partnerships through, for example, and this is where the evidence comes in, the strengthening of local resource hubs and shared working centers. You may not have thought about this as maybe one way to do capacity development interventions, but the evidence actually supports this. So I highly encourage you to check out this oldie but a goodie 2013 research report from Root Change, and I'll share the link to that maybe in a follow-up, in which they did a systems analysis on the local capacity development ecosystems in Nepal and Tanzania, in which they found, the ability of local actors, NGOs, CSOs to influence, to broker connections, to create social capital for themselves, so that they were able to sustain themselves, and they were able to, take up positions of leadership at their national level, at the global level, and so on. And so if we're really strengthening ecosystems as well as leaders, I think, there's so much available. The sky's the limit in terms of what can happen in terms of mutual capacity strengthening. So it's not just mutual between, I think, INGO and local NGO or so on, but mutual between all the actors in the system. And what do we all have to contribute to each other? Everything, as some of the other speakers were saying, everyone has something to contribute. So I highly encourage you to check that out. And it's really been a pleasure being with you here today.
Yeah, thank you, Maya. And really thank you all for joining this conversation. We're reaching time, so I'll unfortunately have to stop this really fruitful conversation here. But we will be sharing a recording of this event, and we'll also, as I said, be sharing a platform for dialogue link where we'll have a discussion thread to add to what we've discussed today, and also to speak to some of the questions that we didn't get to. And a huge, huge thank you to Maya, Matt, Amy, Pauline, and Arjun. This has been really great to have you all join us today.
Thanks so much. Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.